During the shutdown, one of the ways I stayed sort of sane was to look through our photo albums of travels and reread my travel journals. And so I got this crazy idea that it would be fun to share some of these adventures with you. I thought if we had 5 or 6 people, it'd be a neat little group. I'm just amazed and really pleased. I think a lot of people thought, I really need to get out today. The neat thing about today's adventure is we don't have to figure out what to pack, we don't have to tote a suitcase, and we don't have to worry about losing our passports. We're going to start in Scandinavia. We all know that's the land of the Vikings, those ferocious, wild men who descended on the Europeans farther south and stole their treasure, often claimed their lands. We know those people. But we've just flown to Stockholm and then gotten on our little ship and sailed 3 hours east to one of Sweden's 20,000 islands. As we walk around Visby, we see the gardens are well tended, the village is busy but orderly, the people are pleasant, civilized, and it's very hard to reconcile what we are seeing and experiencing with that picture of Vikings. And I think that's a good reminder that when we identify a group of people, slap a label on them, and then walk away, we miss so much of who they really are. Someone. They hammered silver in their artisan guilds and traded in Hanseatic ports. These northern men whose shores were washed by Baltic and North Seas also flung their axes at the necks of southern civilized Europeans. These things we learned in school. There's no denying Goths and Visigoths, Angles, Saxons, and Vikings. But what else went on in Christian IV's glistening castles, in Peter the Great's gilded onion domes, within Tallinn's dark age council hall, beside Visby's ancient flowering gardens? Someone stood in the Vandal kitchens, creating borscht and apfelstrudel, taming the wild meat shot down on the hunt. Someone stood for women beside Helsinki's harbor and early sparked their civil rights. Someone kissed the children who filled Tallinn's schools in 1250 and Krakow's university in 1364. Someone stood at the easel making precursive strokes for Munch, Kandinsky, Bruegel. Someone plucked his lute, sending folk songs into the future for Grieg and Sibelius to hum into symphony. Someone smiled at exiled strangers, Jews and Scottish Protestants, and let them build new lives in Danzig. Inside forbidding stone walls, lookout turrets, castle keeps, someone knew the makings of peace. Now, oh no.
I like that.
Okay, we're going to get back on our little ship and go east a bit to Finland. We're going to Helsinki's National Museum. There's an exhibit there containing the remains of a medieval woman who had been buried with her meager possessions, which they were sure she would need in the next world. Beside the bones. In the Museum of Relics, one exhibit stands out. A woman's skeletal remains that have survived 15 centuries. The bones are simply bones, but the objects that kept her company in her dark, earthy tomb reveal a life packed with servitude. A pot, a sickle, and shears. It seems there's no rest for the weary. Okay, time to go southwest to Copenhagen. If I say amusement park, you'll probably think Disney, Legoland, Six Flags. But the Danes had Tivoli Gardens long before those extravagant parks. And the amazing thing is, Tivoli Gardens is right in the center of downtown Copenhagen. 1 minute, we're walking down a city sidewalk, we take one little turn, and suddenly we're in this almost magical place. The gardens are beautiful. There are outdoor stages for shows and concerts. There are wonderful restaurants where we can get a bite to eat, and a super ice cream shop for dessert, and of course amusement rides too. Rethinking breakfast at Tivoli Gardens. At city center, behind a dull building, a path beckons, demands its fee, then releases us into a light-streaked garden. Here, this morning's burnt toast crumbles from memory, as a cheerful lot of Danes serpentine toward the bandstand stage. A slim, well-kept lady in a lavender wool beret, never mind the summer heat, sways beside an elm, tapping clarinet keys only she can see. Beside her, lovers press arm's length. 2 tots drum in a wagon. A baby's eyes waver toward twilight. In Tivoli land, the breeze blows gently. The wine tastes of friendship. The carousel half tames its red and gold beasts, and pink scoops sate the palate. This translucent bubble, a playful reprieve from gnomes and ogres, spreads jam on our fresh-baked bread. Okay, let's sail farther east to Russia, the west coast of Russia. Peter the Great loved the culture and monuments of Western Europe, and he saw no reason at all he shouldn't duplicate them in his homeland. He chose a set of marshy islands just off the coast in the Baltic Sea to build his Venice of the North. When it was finished, with its canals, bridges, and lanes, and its palaces, and what today is that fantastic Hermitage Museum that's just packed to the gills with art. When it was finished, Peter named it St. Petersburg. Now, whether he had in mind Peter of the Bible or he was thinking a little closer to home, I don't know. St. Petersburg, where greatness lies. Peter, born prince, but not the great, earned that title by imagining a city where a swamp and 42 islands lay. In that roomy, half-frozen marsh, and men dug and moved the sodden soil a moment east of Baltic waves. Soon palaces rose, and onion-domed orthodoxy too, connected by bridges and cobblestone lanes. Now, 20,000 a day tromp through the Winter Palace, home of Catherine, also the Great. These hordes sample a Raphael, 2 Rembrandts, 3 Renoirs, and 16 saints. Sated, they gasp to learn. In 8 years' time, they can view all the Hermitage, 1 minute per work. How great! Oh yes, Peter died of a cold. Time to head west again to Germany. Just north of the German coastline lie the 2 seas, the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. They meet right there, and it is not a friendly encounter. because the two bodies of water have different tide schedules, a ship that is trying to make a passage through that imaginary line has a very rough and often dangerous time of it. For that reason, many years ago, the Germans decided they needed a detour. So they dug this trench through the rich Saxony farmland that avoids the rough spot. It's 90 miles long and it's called the Kiel Canal, K-I-E-L. We're going to sail through on a beautiful, picture-perfect summer day. Some of the locals come down to water's edge to wave at us. Others are walking or riding their bikes on the path beside the canal. And a man has just finished his canal swim right before our ship shows up. Kiel Canal, lesson in perfection. A century has spun by since Germans linked their neighbors, the battling Baltic and North Seas, taming their opposing tides with finesse. They dug a ditch, wide and gentle, into the rich black Saxony soil, a channel that eases our ship past their daily lives. A farmer leans on his hoe, and 7 swans sing in a row. A couple passes us tandem, steering their spokes from random. A swimmer claws up the bank, grabbing weeds by the hank. A villager whitewashes a white fence that his brow inspects in moments. Dockside, the locals cluster to wave as one to our crowded banister. I call to the white pony at field edge. Do you know you graze in Eden? He calls back, either that or we'll die pretending. Well, time to get off the ship. We need to take a plane. We're going over most of continental Europe down to the countries that border the Mediterranean. And we'll start in the country of Croatia. Croatia, of course, is one of the newer countries. It was carved out of the old Yugoslavia. During the Civil War, let me get my place here. During the Civil War, the lovely coastal city of Dubrovnik was seriously wounded. This war involved Croats, Serbs, Bosnians, Kosovans. It was a terrible time for everyone. People who had different faiths and customs, but had sometimes been next-door neighbors, found themselves lashing out against each other, often killing each other. But we're there sometime after the war, and now people are trying to reconnect. It's a long, slow process. Recovery program. Walking along the medieval streets of Dubrovnik's fabled Old Town, we are split in two. One half caught up in the charm of fieldstone homes brimming with history. One half horrified at the mortared remains of modern-day civil war. Overhead, roofs foretell a promising future. Vibrant orange tiles proclaim renewal after battle. Weathered brown ones connote random survival. In time, the scorching Adriatic sun will dull the new ones till they blend perfectly with their older neighbors. As one awkward gesture invites another, the locals strive to regain the congenial warmth they once enjoyed. Behind jutting dormers, former enemies realize they lace their shoes in tandem moves each morning. Around weathered kitchen tables, Catholic and Orthodox admit they consume their daily bread in parallel motions. In cozy cafes, Christians and Muslims begin to mouth tentative chats about the weather. At his hilltop guest house, the Croat Pero welcomes Serbs, toasting them with homemade Orahavika. Youngsters who can't remember the winter years influence their seniors, who now reject the bitter taste of hate. Hope unfurls one timid handshake at a time, breeding new possibilities that heal the heart. As we start up the coast through the Adriatic Sea, we pass through UNESCO World Heritage Site places, beautiful islands, forests, and we realize it's so easy to romanticize places when we see beautiful places like this. We think, oh, this is just ideal. If I lived here, life would just be perfect. And of course, real life is not exactly like that, and it's sometimes quite gritty. But we're tourists on a well-planned itinerary here. But we're going to try to be a little more realistic. Then we come to the lovely little island of Korčula. The little town sits on the hill, surrounded by medieval walls with turrets. If ever there was the setting for a fairy tale, this has got to be it. Monday morning in Korčula. Adriatic blues and greens tap at your doorsteps, and stacked stone walls evoke your past. Have I waltzed into a fairy tale? Will Rapunzel let down her golden locks from the crumbling turret? Do I hear the clatter of tilting swords? Cobblestones direct our way between closely planted apartment walls, where flying laundry reminds me. Above the fairy dust, beyond Dwarvian fancies, after sleeping potion enchantments, the sheets must still be washed. Okay, we'll go south and then around the peninsula and east to Greece. Soon after World War II, Greece was taken over by a military junta. Yanis Ritsos was part of a rebel band that tried to dislodge this repressive government. For his efforts, he spent a good bit of time in prison. Ritsos was not only a soldier, he was also a poet whose words inspired his fellow soldiers. The prisoner's sentence. Yanis Ritsos paces the fetid cell, soldering patriot bullets into lettered sets. The words tumble out, liberating, as his Greek homeland ought to be. He prances the cubicle, capturing escapee phrases first written in blood. Frenzied lines cohere, free-falling onto scraps of paper into a cloudy bottle. Later, while guards soak in ouzo, he acts, easing fermented stanzas from their secret cache. He pounds them into Nico's head, demanding oral proof they be delivered intact. Come spring, Nico slips through the bars, weighing a verse more than when he first met this man. Armed with more than sword, he races, flinging a new standard to warriors starved for poem. As a little postscript to this story, I mean, this is imaginary. I don't know what really happened. One night about maybe 8-10 years ago, I was watching the news. A journalist was interviewing an older man in his apartment in Athens. And it was Yanis Ritsos. I wanted to wave and say, hi, I know you. This woman said at that time, he was 84 years old, and was considered the unofficial poet laureate of Greece. So he survived. That's good. We're going to sail up the west coast of Greece in the Ionian Sea to the island of Corfu. And then we'll take a bus. We're going to go up this really twisty, windy road all the way to the top of the mountain, where there is a 1,000-year-old monastery called Paleokastrita. A question of altitude at Paleokastrita. Leaving Corfu town, we S the ascending road with a G and a ha, up and around and up. At last, we climb a slanted drive, debark, and trudge uphill to enter Paleokastrita, a whitewashed retreat that has guarded its peak for nearly a millennium, welcoming pilgrim, sojourner, and tourist alike. In the Bougainvillea garden, a commanding gong announces, "Now rise, now pray, now eat, now pray, now work, now pray, now sleep." In the twilighted church, our busload belies this schedule. We wander into dark recesses, seek non-existent benches. Half hear our earnest explainer, and eye the latticed balconies where women and children must sit. We're closer to heaven, smiles our guide, in defense of her creative theology. And I wonder why we imagine a loft or a hilltop can improve our vision or ensure a static-free connection with the divine. If we look at a map of Greece, we can see right away that it is a very mountainous country. That means, of course, there isn't much good farmland to feed the people. We can also see from the map that Greece is surrounded by water on 3 sides at least. And that means that people who lived in the coastal towns especially were easy prey for pirates of the Mediterranean. So for these reasons, and I'm sure many others, the Greeks have been leaving their homeland for centuries. Some sailed east, settled around the Black Sea, or in modern-day Turkey. Some went south across the Mediterranean to Alexandria and other North African cities. One little boat, at least, headed west and eventually bumped into the coast of southeast France. These people were looking for safety, and they found this little mountain near the coast that was really steep, and they thought if they built their village right up on top, at last they would know a little safety. They built their village, they named it Eze, E-Z-E, and they lived up there, I guess, safely. Today, it's mostly a tourist stop. And so these lumbering tourist buses come up the mountain, and a half dozen of them parked together on a parking lot about this big. We get out of ours and walk up the hill. Now the interesting thing about Eze is there are no sidewalks as we know them. If you lived in Eze and you wanted to visit your next door neighbor or go to the store, when you leave your house, you immediately either go up steps or down steps. Only stairways. A question for the Greeks. It seems the Greeks never did like Greece. Some moved to the Black Sea coast, though they feared its dark and wild waters. Some produced Hellenistic glory days in downtown Asia Minor. Some rode to the sands of Africa. And some, a motley few, climbed a hill in Gallic land 1,000 years back. When they reached the summit, far above today's glitzy Riviera, they christened it Asa. Asa can surely match any crag in the Greek hills, yet it was a safer crag, away from warring neighbors, pirates from sea and land. Here they built a church and solid homes from the rock beneath their feet. And now, cubbyhole stores along the chiseled stairs display their wares on rock outcrops, while cafes are defined by ancient walls. It's up 3 steps for espresso and a brioche, turn right for birdhouse crafts, and down 6 for shawls and purses. If these sturdy immigrants could have foreseen buses the size of Trojan horses, and invaders who emerged to conquer Asa's Peak, stopping for a photo and a Kitsy keychain, would they have packed up, slid down their mountain, and paddled back to Greece? Now we're off to Italy. I talked with a couple who had taken their whole family on a tour of Italy. When they returned, their little granddaughter announced, "Venice is the best." Riding the carousel in Venice. "Venice is the best," declares the world traveler, who's only 8. But who isn't 8 in this pulsing corral of streeted waters? Who doesn't prance to the carousel beat? Trotting vaporetti, local and express. Parading gondolas, plumped in velvet. Galloping UPS craft on delivery. Ambling garbage scows on pickup. Rough-riding city police. Cantering thoroughbred taxis. And free-ranging pleasure yachts. While engineers shake their baffled heads at rising tides and sinking squares, we giddy children mount our steeds, blind to the oncoming stampede. Just about dead center in the Mediterranean is the island of Malta. For many, many centuries, sailors coming in all directions would stop on Malta, and usually they tried to claim the island for their own nation. That means the Maltese have had a host of owners over the years. And in fact, Malta did not get its independence until the 1970s. Island for sale, the Malta experience. How did they find it? This tiny isle in a big sea. This bit of rock that has lured combatant sailors for 5,000 years and more. Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and Byzantines sniffed past salt air to its stony soil. Romans, Spanish, and Knights Templar planted their boots on its cliffside beaches. Arabs, French, and Brits moored their boats in its etched harbors. Turks waged a failed siege, while Italians and Sicilians launched daggered incursions. All coveted the real estate of location, location, location. All but St. Paul, who turned his shipwreck into a goodwill mission. If legend tells it true, he healed and preached with pacifist plowshares. His swordless theology disarmed the Roman consul, who decreed a Christian era. Today, tales of blood, guns, and death are confined to dungeon museums, while cathedral bells peal into the sunlight. Malta's capital city of Valletta is full of life, but just down the road a ways is a quite different kind of town. It's called Mdina, M-D-I-N-A. The curious thing about Mdina is only about 24 people live there. There are some nuns who stay behind their cloistered walls. There are some diehards who still live in their ancestral crumbling homes. But that's about it. Each day, people from the neighboring town of Rabat come to service the tourist trade. Each morning they come, open the gift shop, the restaurant, the museum. But even with that heightened amount of activity, we can walk for blocks on end and not see a single soul. The silent city of Emdina. Cut through this alley and turn here by the sharp corner. Find the exit before you're captured by the silent city, before you become a sun-bleached statue, a sandstone house, a circling wall. Where are the women who buy pasta and beans? Where are the children who race through the plaza? Where are the faithful who kneel at daily mass? Where are the old men who talk politics with their hands? Only tourists and locals from Rabat who take their coins dare to pass through the ancient city walls and walk these mute-shadowed streets, their shoes clicking no sound in the vacant town. We'll get back on our ship now, and we're going to head west, through the Strait of Gibraltar, to somewhere in Spain. Many people who are desperate to leave their homes in Africa hope to get to what they see as prosperous cities in Europe. They hope they can make a new life there, send money home to the family. But often they get part way and then they get stuck. National Geographic magazine had an article about a young Nigerian man who hoped to get to London. He got as far as Spain and then just couldn't seem to put enough money away for the rest of the trip, didn't have the right papers to make it. And he's not unusual. The Spanish call this halfway in-between spot the Carrefour. Of course, everyone has a cell phone now, so we can imagine him calling home from Spain. The phone call. When he calls home to his Nigerian family, Murtola says, "All's well." The lie bites his tongue as he forces out the words. He has to shut his eyes and seal his nose to the sight and smell of the abandoned slaughterhouse where he camps out for now. He says, "Your money's coming," as he relives tortured days bent in two, endlessly picking berries in sun-drenched Spain. He exists in the Carrefour, that crossroads you stay in after leaving home, but not yet arriving at your destination. As months turn into years and London becomes a distant dream, he starts to doubt he'll ever leave this in-between land where he labors without credentials. He says, "Life is good," and hangs up quickly before the truth escapes his lips. Now it's north to the southwest coast of England, to Cornwall. There's a little spit of rocky land, juts out into the ocean. It's called Land's End. When you stand there, and all you can see ahead of you is water, but you know behind you are these huge hunks of land, it's an incredible experience. And of course, since this is another tourist stop, there is a souvenir shop nearby. Glad to know. At Land's End. All Europe, Asia even, hides behind your shoulders as you face the thrashing sea which rolls itself towards Land's End. A puny rock pile bulging Cornwall's coast. The funky kiosks selling postcards, Union Jack mugs, approximate maps on tinny trays, cannot erase the mariner's voice as he answers the siren's call. Bye, dear. See you next year. Maybe, maybe not. And farther north, we'll go to Ireland. During the potato famine, the overseers of the Irish tenant farmers soon learned it was cheaper to buy tickets to the New World for a family than it was to try to feed them through the winter. So it was that thousands of them packed up their few belongings and headed to the coast, not having the foggiest notion what was going to happen next. About 2/3 of them left from the seaport town of Cove. 2 ways to leave home. These photos, relics, words, they remembered the Irish. The ones who sought passage, not knowing what steerage was. Knowing only raw hunger at home and the siren's call from Boston. These innocents packed a bag, a bundle, even a crusted cook pot, then clambered beneath the windswept deck. In that pit where air was parceled out, then squeezed from each dole into sour, rotten juices. There they learned what steerage meant. And on the day we saw them, these photos, relics, words, in the Harbor Museum at Cove, the cruise ship Norwegia lolled in the waters just beyond, its pampered guests sitting on plump cushions, sipping sweet lemonade. We talked about the Vikings a little bit earlier. It is true that they came to Ireland. It is true that they took what loot they could find. But there was one stash, at least, that they did not find. And in fact, it remained hidden for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was finally found not too long ago, and most of it anyway is in a museum in Dublin. And when we go there and walk into the room where it's all displayed, it's just a dazzling sight. There's all this gold and gems, just incredible. But the most interesting part of the story, I think, is that this stash was not found by treasure hunters, but by men working on the Irish Railroad. So this might have happened. Shiny bobs. We were digging the Limerick Rail when we found the secret cache. A stash planted so crafty, not even filthy Vikings or vile Sir English had discovered it. We stuffed our shirts with collars of gold a handspan wide and jammed our pockets with shiny bobs. We ran like wild men to the melting pots and came away rich wild men. We left a few baubles behind, and now they say people dress up fancy and strut around a museum in Dublin to gawk at our leavings, locked in glass cases and marked gold, 1800 BC. They might think us robbers, forgetting our sweaty years hammering iron and hauling those ties, while they dressed up fancy to strut around a museum in Dublin. There are lots of villages in Ireland, so this might be a good time to ask, how does a village start? How does a village survive? The Peaceable Kingdom at Glen Bay, Ring of Kerry, 1810. Jeremiah Mulvihill came first, chose this verdant spot in County Kerry, where enchanted rains blessed the land, and made himself sole founder of the Bog Village. He built a sturdy house laid rough stone floors, and stacked peat cubes outside for fuel. A fine turf cutter, he hauled the rich black loam into market town for a tidy sum. Then came the neighbors, Jack Bell O'Sullivan, who built a forge, Phil McGillicuddy, the dairyman, the day laborer, Denny Riordan, and Patty Brown, Thatcher. Jack shoed Jeremiah's ponies. Phil's cream brought bounty to Denny's table. Denny's eggs fed Jack's little ones, and Patty repaired everyone's house. They settled their feuds over a pint or two, sharp barbs bursting apart like yeasty froth on their brew. And we battle-weary moderns covet whatever leprechaun magic lurked in their ale. Okay, time to take another ride in our ship. We're going northwest this time to the island of Iceland. Iceland is, of course, made up entirely of volcanic residue. And in fact, when we leave the capital city of Reykjavik, we can go miles on end and see nothing but this rough, black pumice stone covering the flat land. In the early days of the settlement, a person who wanted to go from village A to village B could easily get lost because there were so few roads and almost no natural landmarks. But the locals were inventive. Fear of stones. Trekking across the treeless plain, stumbling on sharp, misshapen stones, the traveler begs for a marker, a sign to show the way. Here there is no path, no left or right, just an endless moonscape in an empty land. Behind him lie no pressed prints, ahead no hint of hope. I cry for rescue in land that can swallow words whole. Then a slight mound ahead, a pile of rubble, stacked by one who came before along this treacherous waste. He runs to touch it, to feel the handiwork, to sense the caring walker who stopped to show the way. That traveler from years ago who knew the fear of treeless plains built a string of rocky signs, a road of simple cairns. The hostile land is changed when the rocks that confused become the rocks of safety, and the stranger becomes the friend. Iceland is not only volcanic, it has another interesting geologic feature. Even though it's a fairly small island, it sits on not one but two tectonic plates. The one plate is moving ever so slowly toward Europe, but the other, moving slowly also, is headed toward the Americas, which makes for a bit of a problem down there underneath. We're going to go to the Great Rift National Park, where we hear stories of farmers leaving their homes in the morning, looking out over the fields and seeing that one field has suddenly dropped 10 feet overnight. So the effects of what's going on down there happen up here too. We walk down a narrow path with natural stone walls on both sides, and we would not be the least bit surprised if the path just cracked open and sucked us right down. The Great Rift. Land to the east is pulled toward Spain, and land to the west feels the tug of Quebec. Nudged by giant watered shelves, tectonic plated wonders, so many leagues beneath our feet. Throwing our underpinnings, which ought to be firm and stable, into constant flux, moving, shifting, just when we need Gibraltar. We're going to finish our trip in Greenland. Let's see. We're going to spend a full day sailing through the fjords of Greenland, and we never see a single person. And as we move in and out of the fog banks and watch this monochromatic landscape of black rocks, white ice, gray skies, we think about the first European settlement here. The story starts with Eric the Red. Eric was a Norwegian who was accused of murder. He fled the country, went to Iceland, where he was accused of murder. He fled the country. And this time he sailed northwest and bumped into this great big vacant island. Of course, he had no idea just how big it was. Full of ideas, as always, he decided to call it Greenland to attract settlers. And it worked. You can explain that? 1,000 years of hush. Eric the Red owned a curious nose, always sniffing the frigid winds, driven beyond known borders, and let's be frank, the law that pursued his murderous hand. He chanced on a land of bleak hope, no Eden, this rugged, rock-strewn island, but passable for a fugitive who'd known Norway's and Iceland's unforgiving chill. His hubris intact, he named it Greenland, hoping to draw adventuring emigres. 1,000 or so heard his call, willed themselves to build brave huts along the south coast. They knew the rumbling of glacial melt, the groaning crescendo of calving ice. They knew the thrashing of Arctic storms, the rise of rogue waves that stole their boats, the erratic treks of menacing floes. And they knew the sound of silence, for it was the heartbeat of this glacial land. We come on a summer's day, not to set up camp, but to slip through pure Christian sound, little specks of life, gazing at that ancient scene. We open the window at dawn to gray skies and a little glacier that slides into the emerald sea, almost within our touch. Fog nestles between stone slabs, then dances ahead and around the bend, reveling in its ghostly game. We stand above the fjord's deep water, sharing its speechless calm, inhaling its muted message, knowing its stories murmur far beneath. These early settlers have left a legacy for these eager vagabonds, a frozen silence we would not break, even if we had the means. So now we have just been to 14 European countries in an hour's time. Pretty good trick, isn't it? And when we get back home, you don't have to open the suitcase and see all those dirty clothes that need to be washed. You don't have to sift through all the mail. You don't have to run to the store to fill the fridge. Just go home with a few good memories, I hope. And thank you all for coming.